Welcome once more, dear students of the first year English literature. Today we're going to have an idea about the literary elements of English drama. When you try to analyze a play, you should have a perfect idea about the dramatic elements. These elements fall into three categories: the literary elements, the technical elements, and the performance elements. Let's take it step by step. As for the first category or first item of these, the literary elements, those were drawn by Aristotle, this great Greek philosopher of the 3rd century BC. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher whose writings still influence even modern and contemporary drama. He gave us 6 literary elements that a traditional type of play has. These are, so if I ask you, what are the literary elements according to Aristotle, you tell me that they are 6 elements. Number 1, it is the plot. The plot is the most important part of or element of a play. What is the plot, or define the plot? The plot is the logical sequence of events in a literary work. The logical المنطقي, the logical sequence التسلسل المنطقي للأحداث في العمل الأدبي. This is the plot, the logical sequence of events in a literary work. The first one, the first critic or playwright who gives us a type of a structure of a plot is the German critic and playwright Gustav Freytag in his book Technique of Drama, written in 1863. In that book, he introduced what is called the dramatic pyramid of Freytag. He analyzes the plot as having about 5 or 6 parts. The traditional type of plot. These parts are the exposition, the inciting action, the rising action or complication, the climax, the falling action, and the denouement or resolution. Let's take it step by step or one after another. A, the exposition or the introduction. The exposition means in Arabic الاستهلال, يستهل الشيء, البداية. In the exposition part of a plot, the writer sets the tone or mood. The exposition serves different functions in the plot. The first function or job of the exposition is letting us know about the tone of the work or the mood of the writer. The tone and the mood. The tone of the work itself and the mood of the writer. The second function of the exposition is to describe the characters being represented on the stage. Not only the characters, but also the setting. What is the setting? The setting is the time and place of the events in a literary work. It also includes the socio-political and economic environment in which the play takes place. The third function of the plot is either to give us a kind of a flashback of past events or retrospection, استرجاع للأحداث الماضية, or a foreshadow of coming events, تنبؤ بالأحداث المستقبلية. So the exposition serves 3 different functions. The second part of the plot after the exposition is the inciting action. The inciting action. It is an event that sparks the other actions, that sparks the conflict. بيتسبب في تداعي الأحداث أو تسلسل باقي الأحداث نحو الذروة حتى تصل إلى الذروة. This is the inciting action. The rising action is this part which takes place after the inciting action. We call it the rising action or the complications, the complication. The incidents or the events begin to be complicated. It is a series of events that develop the conflict until it reaches the climax. So what is the climax? The climax, or in Arabic, ذروة الأحداث, is the highest point of interest or suspense in the plot. It is the peak, the vertical limit. It is the vertical and horizontal limit of the events at the same time. At the climax, we have the fortunes, okay, or the destinies of the hero, heroine, or protagonist, in which they are reversed. يعني قدر البطل أو البطلة بيتغير عند the climax or ذروة الأحداث. Which in turn, if this happens, this in turn determines the future course of the events, the remaining events of the play, until we reach a denouement at the end. After the climax, we have a falling action. The falling action. It is all of the other events that follow the climax until it reaches the denouement or the resolution. What is the denouement or the resolution? اللي هي بنسميها حل العقدة. Denouement is a French word by the way. Resolution, حل. Sometimes we don't have a resolution or denouement, we have a catastrophe. I'll tell you later on what is it. The denouement or the unknotting, to knot, K-N-O-T-T, يربط أو يعمل عقدة. So we have three different names. We have the denouement, we have resolution, and unknotting. Unknotting. What is it? It is the point at which the central conflict, which is the climax, is ended or resolved. It is the stage wherein the action ends in success or failure for the protagonist or the hero. So at this point, at the denouement, we know what happens to the major character of a play. What becomes of his destiny or fate? Is it a happy ending or a bad ending? At this point, the conflicts are settled, are answered. The mystery is solved if there is a mystery, for example. Or the misunderstanding, is it cleared or not? The denouement also includes any following events that tie up loose ends. If there are any details, minor details within the plot or within the entire play, at this part of the plot, I mean the denouement, these loose ends, these details are answered and settled. If the play ends with the fall or death of the main character, as in tragedy, then the denouement is known as the catastrophe. So the catastrophe is another name for the ending part of the plot in case something bad happens to the major character who is the hero or the protagonist. Now we talk about the second element of the sixth elements laid by Aristotle. We have just talked about the plot. Now we move on to the theme, T-H-E-M-E, which means in Arabic الموضوع أو الفكرة الرئيسية. The theme is the main idea or topic of a play. What I want to draw your attention to is that in some cases, the theme of a play is quite obvious, quite clear, apparent. At other times, it's quite subtle, unknown, implicit, not easily understood. The third element of the literary elements is the characters. The characters are the people. Sometimes we find the characters not human beings, but animals or ideas even. The third element of the six literary elements which Aristotle talked about is the characters. The characters are the people portrayed by the actors on the stage in a play. Sometimes we don't have human beings, but instead we have animals or ideas representing the characters. The characters are very important in literary work. They move the action forward of the plot, and they are assessed or evaluated بيتم تقييمهم on the basis of what they say and do and what the other characters say about them. And at this point, I'd like to draw your attention to a very important point, which is how to analyze a character, how to draw a character sketch. Three important aspects are to be considered. Number one, the literal aspect. Two, the functional aspect. And three, the connotative aspect. The literal aspect is how the character appears on the stage. What does he put on? How long or fat or tall or short? Okay. Does he carry something throughout the action? This is the literal aspect. The function aspect is or relates to what does he play during the course of the events? What is his function? What is his role? Number three, and this is the most important of all, is that the connotative aspect. What does he symbolize or stand for? ماذا يمثل? What ideas does he bring to the stage? Implicit ideas, of course. The main character is called the hero or protagonist. If he is a male character, then he is the hero. If she is a female, then she is called the heroine. When he or she is portrayed as brave, noble, so he or she is called a hero or heroine. But the main character can be any everyday person, a normal man, with no bravery or whatsoever, with normal qualities, good or evil. He might be an evil man or woman, and hence called a protagonist. In that case, we call him not a hero or a heroine, but a protagonist. The protagonist often is opposed by someone called an antagonist or a villain. الشخصية الشريرة في المسرح. The fourth element of the literary elements, it is the dialogue. The dialogue refers to the words written by the playwright and spoken by the characters on the stage. The dialogue helps move the action of the play along. It's very important. And the language used is very important as well. The fifth element is music. Music or rhythm. الموسيقى أو الإيقاع. While music is often featured in drama, in this case, Aristotle in the past, of course, there was no music being performed on the stage by a character or so, but there was a kind of rhythm. In modern drama, there is already music. So at Aristotle's time, music referred to the rhythm of the actors' voices as they spoke, or the actors as they spoke on the stage. Because at that time, plays were written in verse form. The sixth element is that of the spectacle, al-mashhad. Everything you see on the stage is part of the spectacle, is the spectacle itself. It is the visual elements of the play, combining the sets. The sets are the background of the stage. Anything at the back of the characters, the background, or the scenery, we call it the scenery. The costumes, the special effects, the lighting, for example, the sound techniques or effects, etc. In short, the spectacle is everything that you as an audience see on the stage while performing the action. Let's now move on to talk about modern elements of drama. So far, we discussed the classical elements of drama, the classical literary elements of drama. Now we move on to talk about the modern literary elements of drama. Modern drama maintained or kept the classical elements of Aristotle, the sixth element of literary works, but added to them many others. So in modern drama, we have the six elements we have just mentioned. In addition, there are much more. The first of these is the convention or convention. These are the necessary techniques or methods or devices used by the playwright. Of course, the playwright is the dramatist or the writer of the play. We call him the playwright or the dramatist. So the techniques or the methods or the devices are the conventions used by the playwright and the director to create the desired dramatic effect, to communicate the message, to convey the message of this work. Conventions are validated by an implicit agreement between whom and whom, between the author and the audience. So the convention implies that there is an implicit agreement, اتفاق غير معلن ضمني غير صريح بين المؤلف والجمهور أو القارئ. What if this agreement is about? It is for solving the problems in representing reality. Of course, the play or a drama is set on a stage with three walls. Three walls. We have on the stage only three walls. ثلاث جدران فقط. Right, the left, and the back. We don't have a fourth wall as in real life. Imagine that you are inside your room or your house. You have four walls. And yet on the stage you have only three walls. How can an audience or a reader imagine that there is a fourth wall on the stage without a kind of convention, a kind of a preset agreement, an implicit agreement between him, the reader, and the writer that there is a fourth wall, as if the writer or the actor asks the audience or the reader to imagine that there is a fourth wall. This is one example of a convention in drama. In watching a modern production, for example, of a Shakespearean play, The audience welcomes a convention. It's okay, by which a proscenium stage with 3 walls, sometimes the stage is round with no walls, represents a room with 4 walls. This is one example. Another example of a convention or an implicit agreement between author and audience is that the audience accepts the convention or the tradition of characters speaking in blank verse instead of prose. What does this mean? Do we as people in modern life speak in verse, use verse in our discourse or our language? هل نستخدم لغة الشعر عند الحديث مع بعضنا البعض؟ No. We use prose fiction. نستخدم لغة النثر, prose language. Okay? But some poems, or some dramas or plays, particularly those of Shakespeare and his contemporaries and those who preceded him, and even some of the plays that followed Shakespeare, they were written in verse, in a blank verse, شعر مرسل. Did they use in real life blank verse in communicating with each other? No, of course not. They use prose. But to have an emotional effect on the writer, on the reader or the audience, so the writer uses, and the characters as well, the actor on the stage, they use blank verse for a greater emotional effect. So they utter their private thoughts in the form of soliloquies and monologues and asides. Of course, there's a difference between a soliloquy, a monologue, and an aside, but later on we'll discover that together. As well as the convention by which actions presented, this is a third example, presented on a single stage in less than 3 hours may represent events which take place in many different places all over the world and over a span of many years. A play is usually set in a specific place, which is the stage, but represents a huge place instead, or refers to a whole country or a state. At the same time, the time span of the play in which the action is performed doesn't exceed the limit of 2 or 3 hours. But sometimes the drama being presented on the stage, the span of the drama itself, the time of the action, may exceed the limit of 1 year, 2 years, or 3 or a century. How could this be possible on the stage without having a kind of agreement between the writer and the audience, that assuming that this is reality while it is not? So this is a convention. The second element of the modern elements is the diction. The diction. The diction is meant by the language or the style used by the writer. The diction is the language or style used by the writer. His chosen words, phrases, sentence structures, and figurative language that constitute the dramatic work. So the diction means the selection of the words, phrases, sentence structures, syntax, grammar, and figurative language that constitute the dramatic work. A writer's diction can be analyzed under a great variety of categories, such as the degree to which the vocabulary and phrasing is abstract or concrete. This is an example of analyzing a language. Is the language used abstract or concrete? Does the writer uses Latin, Anglo-Saxon, modern English, or medieval English? and so. The third element is the audience. The audience in modern drama is an integral part of the work performed on the stage. The audience is the group of people watching the play, or the spectators. Many playwrights and actors consider the audience to be the most important element of a drama. Indeed, they are the audience. Conflict is a fourth modern element, which means the internal or external struggle between opposing forces. Usually in a literary work, we find opposing forces, struggling forces, a hero and an anti-hero, a protagonist and an antagonist. Sometimes we have the hero opposed to the entire society, or the hero in front of the entire universe. Sometimes we have opposing ideas, not necessarily people, but opposing ideas or interests, which create, all of this creates dramatic tension. Then we have the setting. The setting is the time and place of the instance. In addition to the social, political, and economic environment that controls the characters. Suspense is another modern element. التشويق. It's a feeling of uncertainty as to the outcome. The audience becomes uncertain about what is going to happen to the major character, the hero or the protagonist, at the end of the play, and this creates a kind of suspense. It is used to build interest and excitement on the part of the audience. Soliloquy, monologue, and aside. A soliloquy is a speech, usually a long speech, by a single actor, but on condition that he is alone on the stage. So a soliloquy is a long speech delivered by a single actor on the stage while he is alone. A monologue is a long speech made by one actor, but that monologue can be in the presence of other characters. It's a long speech in the presence of other characters on the stage. So he is not alone. The aside بنسميها مناجاة جانبية. Aside is a short speech delivered or made by a single character in the presence of other characters, but he addresses not these characters but the audience. He directs his speech to the audience. يجي على جنب كده ويكلم الجماهير، يقول لهم حاجة ما بينه وبينهم. This is the aside. These are the literary elements, whether those of Aristotle or modern drama. What about the technical elements? We have different technical elements. عناصر فنية. Technique. Number one is the scenery or the set. The scenery is the theatrical equipment, such as the curtains, backdrops, the backdrop, anything that is painted or drawn behind the actors, okay? Or platforms. A platform is something high, a step higher than the other parts of the stage on which a character presents or delivers a speech, a monologue, or a soliloquy. All of these curtains, backdrops, platforms are used in dramatic production to communicate the environment, to tell you what environment does the hero live in, or the other characters even. Costumes is the second element of the technical elements. Costumes, الملابس. It is the clothing and accessories worn by actors to portray character and period, because certain clothes and certain accessories, when they are put on by the characters or dressed by the characters, they represent a certain period of time or a certain type of character. So a queen or a king or a prince doesn't wear or dress in the same way like a rustic man or a common man. It differs. Number 3, props. It is an abbreviation of the word properties. A property on the stage. Properties are any portable or movable object. أي شيء بيحمل على خشبة المسرح is a prop. Any item that appears on the stage or is used by an actor to help enhance the dramatic performance. It helps greatly not only the costumes, but anything that is being held by a character, which helps in the dramatization of the action, is very important and considered as being part of the props, such as a telephone, a book, a weapon, a sword, a gun, for example, etc. Lights is part of the technical elements. How do lights function as part of the technical elements needed for a performance? The placement of the lights, the intensity of the lights, the color, even the color of the lights, all of these help to communicate the environment, okay, whether the place is at night or in the morning, the mood of the character, happy or sad, melancholic, ironic, satiric, or whatever, even the feelings. So lights are very important. Then the sound, the effects an audience hears, the sound effects which an audience hears during the performance to communicate a character, context, or environment. Suppose that there is a fire at the background of the stage, that the characters tell you there is, the audience, there is a fire, and that there is a fire brigade coming to put off that fire, and then you hear the sound of the bells of a fire brigade. How would you know that the fire is put out or there's help coming on the way without having such sounds? Or a gunshot at the background, for example. So the sound is very important. Make-up is the final element of the technical ones. Make-up and maquillage. The costumes, the wigs. The wig is that false hair put on by a character. Okay, the bald character, شخص أقرع يعني, puts on a wig to perform another character. Even the body paint, not necessarily makeup on the face, but body paint, when a character paints his body in a way or another. It is used to transform an actor into a character. Then we have number 3, the performance elements. The performance elements. We have different elements relating to the performance. One, it is the acting. What is the acting? What is meant by the acting? The use of the face, the body, the voice to portray a character. All of these differ hugely in the representation of a certain character and his mood. Number 2, the character motivation. دافع الشخصية. This is very important. It means the reason or reasons for a character's behavior. Why does a character behave in a certain way, aggressively, humbly, or whatever? What is the reason for his certain attitude or behavior? It means also an incentive or inducement for further action of a character. دوافع الشخصية لارتكاب أو عمل شيء معين. The fourth element is the breath control. the breath control. It is the proper use of the lungs and diaphragm. Diaphragm, it is a certain muscle between the lungs and the stomach. Okay, the diaphragm. The use of the proper use, الاستخدام المناسب of the lungs and diaphragm for maximum capacity and efficiency of breath and for speaking, of course. When you try to shout at someone, you use your lung and your voice, this muscle, in a certain way that differs when you use the low voice. The vocal expression, it means how an actor uses his or her voice to convey a certain character. To convey the character of a king, a hero, a ghost, for example. So all of these matters. Inflection. By inflection, I mean the change in the pitch or loudness of the voice. When the voice goes up or down at certain moments during the performance. It's very important. This is inflection. Gestures. إيماءات أو إيحاءات. It is any movement of the actor's head. When I use my head in that way, to and fro, from side to another, to convey this meaning of rejection, اعتراض مثلا أو رفض. Shoulder, to convey the meaning of that you don't know something, for example. Arm, hand, leg, or foot, to convey meaning, a certain meaning. Facial expressions, the physical and vocal aspects used by an actor to convey mood, feeling, or personality. It differs. When you open up your eyes to the largest size you could ever do, to express a certain kind of fear or surprise, or when you close them so that you can concentrate on something, these are facial expressions. Or when you open your mouth wide open to explain or express excitement or surprise. So all of these matters on the stage. Thank you, dear students, and see you inshallah next lectures.